Hello Internet, Seth Skorikowski, and welcome to part 2 of our review/how-to for Kult Divinity Lost. In part 1 we covered just the general overview, the game's themes, and what it's about. In this episode we're going to start diving into the mechanics a little bit by making ourselves a player character. I've always said that the first step in learning a new RPG is just to go ahead and make yourself a player character, and then as you start getting deeper into the nuts and bolts of the system and all the different rules, you have a point of reference as far as how those things will affect this character or how that character will do those things. Now as a reminder, Kult, and therefore this video series, is intended for a mature audience, and players and game masters should discuss with one another beforehand any topics or areas that they wish to downplay or not include in their game, as well as those certain topics and areas that they really want to explore and deep dive into. And that should be done prior to character creation, but should definitely be done by the time character creation is complete. Okay, disclaimers out of the way, let's get this thing started. I brought up in the last video how there's several different levels of player characters. The first is sleepers. This is where most people in the world belong. They're characters who are completely ignorant to the illusion, distracting themselves with some form of addiction in order to remain asleep. Now this could be social media, diet and exercise, television, even tabletop role-playing games. The game recommends that if you wish to start the game out as a sleeper and roleplay you through that portion where you're being introduced to the hidden truths of the world, that all the characters in the group also be sleepers. So if the whole group wants to do it, then great. Otherwise, it recommends that you all go ahead and start off as aware player characters. Personally, I really like that. Having played various different games where normal people are introduced to the supernatural and magic, and then we're role-playing out their initial disbelief, as they're discovering what the world is really about, that is a lot of fun the first time. Or when you have an established group who are all doing the supernatural stuff, and then we have to introduce a new player character because maybe an old one got taken out, or we're introducing someone else to the group or something, and we have to go through that character's initial disbelief before the game can continue forward. So it kind of grinds the game to a halt as we're now kind of introducing this character to the idea of the supernatural and magic. Once again, that's a hell of a lot of fun the first time, but after a while it does have a tendency to get old. So I really appreciate that Kult says that, hey, if you want to be a disbeliever that's being introduced to the supernatural, then great, but it works best if all of you are. Now, most characters are going to begin as aware characters. They know that something is off with the world, but they don't necessarily know what that is. For that, we get 20 archetypes, which is a whole hell of a lot. And if a character concept doesn't fit into any of these, it's very easy to make up your own archetype that works. However, only one of each aware archetype should be present in a story, so only one careerist or only one fixer. Archetypes don't necessarily mean what the character's profession is, but more of a personality type that they have. Now for this example, let's go ahead and go with the detective, a personal favorite type of character for me. Next, we're going to take our character sheet. Now, you can download these for free from the Kult Divinity Lost website, and you can tell by the top that this is the aware character sheet. Now it's a perfectly fine character sheet, perfectly serviceable, but me being me, I've gone ahead and made some tweaks to it, and I have this custom sheet, which outside of a little splash of color in the logo, the only changes that I made were adding a field for experience and advancements, as well as pre-filling in the unarmed weapon stat, since every character should begin with unarmed fighting as one of the things they can do. It really doesn't make any difference which one you use, but if you do want to use my character sheet, I have a download link in the video description below. So now, armed with our character sheet, let's look at the detective. At the top we can see various occupations: beat cop, lawyer, investigative journalist, hacker, conspiracy theorist, and so on. I think I'll go with a classic private eye. So moving back to our character sheet, at the upper left we'll fill in our character name, Jack Morton. Archetype is detective. Occupation is private eye. And then for experience and advancements, both are currently at 0 because this is a brand new character. Next, we'll choose our character's dark secret. It offers us 5 suggestions to choose from. Now, notice that it says suggestions here. Players can, of course, choose a different dark secret if they prefer. Now, some game masters might want all the characters to share the same dark secret as one another, like a shared event that binds all the player characters together. For example, in my current campaign, all of the player characters shared an occult experience from several years earlier where a botched seance in their early 20s led to several deaths became the shared bond between all the player characters, and together my players determined what that dark secret was and what all happened to it, and that kind of became the big motivation behind the entire campaign of what's going on with these characters. So Game Masters, if you want to do a shared dark secret, let your players know, because the dark secrets are one of the defining moments in a character's life. However, for this example, I'm only going to stick to these 5 suggestions. We have forbidden knowledge, guilty of a crime, occult experience, returned from the other side, and strange disappearance. I'm going to go with forbidden knowledge here. Now, checking what that means, it says that we've uncovered some horrid truth that brings reality's very nature into question. Examples include unlocking the means to move between dimensions, exposing the mayor's true demonic visage, proof that the history is being rewritten, or simply discovering that the world is an illusion. Not only that, but the illusion's keepers are after me for what I know. It then offers some suggestions as far as what our personal drive is from this dark secret. Okay, so let's say that last year we were hired to find a woman's sister. The client, Jennifer Walsh, insisted that her sister Beth lived in an apartment that's now no longer there. It's not like it was destroyed, but the building that were on either side of this apartment building are now next to one another, and there's no trace that this apartment building ever existed except for a single photograph that she has. So our detective is looking into this. Now, nothing in the city records except for by chance they found a newspaper article, something like a traffic accident or something. But in the background of a photograph, the apartment building is clearly visible in this picture. So our detective goes and checks it out, and it's just nothing but a narrow alley between these 2 buildings that were on opposite sides of this apartment complex. But, no signs of recent construction, nothing like that. And frustrated, he was about to give up and go home. But then, out of the corner of his eye, he sees it. And then all of a sudden, it's right there, plain as day, a full-size building that no one else seems to notice. So he goes and checks it out, maybe get some photographs and report back to the client. But the client died in an accident, and now the photograph that she sent to him, the initial evidence that she had, is gone. And the picture that he found in the newspaper is also gone. So now our player character has the only proof that this building exists, whatever photographs that they took. And maybe he's found other places that somehow have fallen between the cracks. Now that he's investigating this, he's on to other places that are like this. But also, he knows that someone is after him for what he knows. Whoever killed Jennifer Walsh and removed all the records of this building, they're going to know about him. So it's given him a personal drive to find out who is behind all of this. So going back to our character sheet, let's fill that all in. Excellent. Now on to our next step, which is selecting our 2 disadvantages for our character. We get 5 suggested disadvantages, and again, these are merely suggestions here if the player character has an idea for an alternate one that they prefer. Now, to find out what these mean, I'm going to check out the large disadvantage list for the short descriptions of them. Looking them over, I think we're going to go with repressed memories and stalkers, our 2 disadvantages. So pulling up the full description of repressed memories, it says that we have repressed memories of some traumatic event. It's possibly something that's related to our backstory. The Game Master gets to decide what their nature is, and when confronted with something that's associated with these memories, we roll 2d10 and determine if we're able to suppress them or how badly we handle these memories resurfacing on us. Okay, so maybe when we found out this apartment building, we went inside, maybe looking for our client's sister, but then we encountered something inside that was just so terrible that we've buried these memories away. Maybe the last thing that we remember after walking up to this building is, speeding away in our car, covered in sweat and our clothes all being torn and filthy. Now, it is up to the Game Master to determine what happened inside this building to determine what might trigger those memories, suddenly resurfacing on them in the middle of another adventure. Next, let's look at Stalker. It says we're being hunted by an unknown enemy and we can't trust anyone. This means we have to regularly move around. At the beginning of the first session, and whenever we expose our current location, we roll 2d10 to determine if our stalker or their minions are onto us. This one works really well with our dark secret, where the keepers of the illusion are after us for what we know, so this is a perfect one to use. So going back to our character sheet, let's fill both of those in. Also note the page numbers for the full descriptions for later reference. That's something I always tell my players to do, and one day they're going to remember to do that. Now, one thing with disadvantages is during the course of play, it is possible to gain more disadvantages based off whatever it is our characters do over the course of their adventures, such as the characters might commit a crime during one adventure and now they're wanted by the law. But also, depending on what happens happens during our games, characters can get rid of their disadvantages, such as eventually this player character might recover those repressed memories, or I might discover my stalker's identity and defeat my stalker as a result. But we're always going to have two disadvantages. So if we get rid of one, we choose another, something appropriate to our situation, such as we might become wanted by the law for murdering our stalker, or we might suffer nightmares as a result of what we did. Now, the book makes it sound like we only do this for the two disadvantages that we got during character creation, and additional ones that we earned above that, we don't need to be replacing those. However, the way I see it just personally is if our character has earned themselves, let's say 3 or 4 disadvantages total, and they remove one of those, and that one just happens to be one of the starting disadvantages, I wouldn't necessarily feel the need that I had to replace that one with something else, providing we still have at least 2 disadvantages for the character, but I'll leave that one up to you. Next, let's get to the fun stuff, character advantages. Each archetype has 8 possible advantages. Now, unlike Dark Secrets and disadvantages, this is a set list, and this is really what makes each archetype unique is what their 8 possible advantages are. Now, personally, as a house rule, I feel that if a player really wants to start off with an advantage that is not on this list, I might allow them to make a good argument and be able to use that instead, only as long as it replaces one of the items from this list. Essentially, they're declaring what their 8 possible advantages are, so that way they're still being left with 8 archetype advantages. So for Detective, our list is Fast Talk, Interrogator, Instinct, Read a Crowd, Shadow, Crime Scene Investigator, Dreamer, and Enhanced Awareness. And for each of those has the associated character attribute listed beside it. So we'll review the master list of advantages from the book to get an idea of what each of these are and what they can do. Maybe read the full descriptions of each of those to really make up our mind, but after weighing them, I'm going to go with these 3: Crime Scene Investigator, Instinct, and Shadow. Reviewing the full descriptions, Crime Scene Investigator allows me to use my Reason attribute to piece together crime scenes by asking specific questions. Instinct allows me to gain an additional bonus whenever I act on any answers from an Observe the Situation move, which we'll get into that when we get into a later video when we're going over game mechanics, but this is a very handy advantage to have. And Shadow helps me out when I'm trying to follow someone undetected, but it can also be used when I'm trying to shake anyone that's pursuing me, a skill that I think is going to be really useful since I have a stalker after me and I'm always at risk of being followed. So once again, going back to our character sheet onto the advantages section, I'll list them here, along with the page numbers of where those abilities are described in full because each of them have a lot of details about them. Now, notice that I've also noticed which attribute each advantage uses. That's going to be useful as we move on to the next step, assigning attributes. Characters in Kult have 10 attribute stats. Willpower, Fortitude, and Reflexes are what's called the passive attributes. Think of these kind of like saving throws that the player character doesn't necessarily choose to activate these as much as they're rolled as a reaction to outside forces. Fortitude is kind of like your constitution, how well you can endure an injury. Reflexes is like your dodge that you'd have in other games, saying how well you can move out of harm's way. And willpower is probably most like sanity or POW that you'd find in Call of Cthulhu, of how well your character can handle mental stress. Now, all characters, regardless of what archetype they are, gets to assign these values to their passive attributes, +2, +1, and 0. So I'm going to go ahead and assign them like this, making Fortitude my highest with a +2 to rolls to it, while my Willpower is the lowest, receiving no bonus, but hey, still not a penalty. Next are our 7 active attributes: Reason, Perception, Intuition, Coolness, Charisma, Violence, and Soul. Each of those is related to a particular action that my character could take, and I can see those listed below, such as Reason is for Investigate, Perception is for Observe a Situation checks, Violence is for how well I engage in combat. Again, we're going to get all the details of what this means in a later video, but for now, each character gets a pool to distribute among their active attributes however they like. +3, +2, +1, +1, 0, then a -1, and a -2. Now we know from our advantages that we just chose that Reason and Perception are what's going to be needed to use those abilities. So I'm going to go ahead and put my +3 and my +2 into those because those are important for my character and I want them to be able to use their special abilities well. Then with the remaining 5 modifiers, I'm going to go ahead and assign those out among the rest with the active attributes. So I'll give a +1 to both my Cool and my Charisma, but my ability to fight and read people are my weakest areas. Of course, as we play the game and we start advancing, these numbers are are most likely going to start approving, but starting out, he's more of a lover but not a fighter. And probably not a great lover either, because he can't read people all too well. Next, let's talk about relations. A character's relations are a huge part of Kult Divinity Lost, not just for story hooks that the Game Master can use, but as ways that characters can recover their stability or find their character's motivations, and there are 3 ratings for this. 0 or neutral relations are kind of like acquaintances, friendly coworkers, people you more of a casual surface relationship with, but nothing too deep. +1 relationships are meaningful. These are your close friends and family, romantic partners, personal gurus, even beloved pets. +2 relationships are vital relations. These are passionate lovers, your true love, your lifelong best friend, your children, maybe even your obsession if you're maybe obsessed with somebody like some celebrity or some ex that you have. These are people that are so important to your character that they've become part of your character's identity, and it's all tied to this one person that's vital to them. Also, relations don't have to be with individuals. I already mentioned that pets can be relations, but organizations can be relations as well, such as a support group like AA or your church or maybe just your gaming group, some community that your character belongs to, which is more important to them than the individuals that are inside of it. Now, relations can also be bad relationships, like our character's stalker disadvantage or the nemesis disadvantage, someone that our character hates or fears so much that they've now become part of the character's identity, their hatred of this one person or this one organization. We'll get more into relationships and how to use them, and adding new ones and how they're going to change and over the course of the adventure in a later video in the series, but for now we simply need to know what they are and who they could be. Every character begins the game with 3 NPC relationships: a 0, a +1, and a +2. They need to say who they are and give them a name and a little bit about them. Most often these NPCs that the player is introducing to the campaign. So game masters are going to need to know who they are and some information about them, and they need to use these NPCs and kind of make them active members of whatever the game world is. So for our character, we'll go back to our sheet, and in the relations section, we're going to list our 3. First, our 0, Ben Hesser, our detective's favorite bartender. Next, our +1, Zofia Matejko, an elderly Polish widow that's kind of like an adopted mother to our player character. And finally, our +2, Mark White, lifelong best friend that's a lawyer and a single dad. Next, depending on our campaign, our characters might begin with relationships to one or even all of the other player characters. The group is going to need to decide and agree on during their session 0 if they know one another and who all might know who. They also might know one another but not really have a strong relationship yet, even enough to call it an actual relation. It also doesn't have to be reciprocated. So one character might be deeply in love with another, but the other player character is kind of neutral toward them in return. The detective archetype lists 5 ways that player characters might have a relationship with the player character here. One of them saved the detective from being in a dangerous situation, making them a +1. One of them tricked the detective into protecting someone they were investigating. A history between them, but not enough to establish a true relationship rating. Another player character helped the detective solve a mystery once, earning them a +1 relation. Another character could be a coworker, giving them each a +1 relation to one another. And another character is one of the detective's informants, giving them a +1 relation. Now, because we're going to be making this character alone and not in a campaign yet, we're going to go ahead and complete this step when we introduce them to another group. But just be aware that characters begin the campaign off with 3 NPC relationships and might have more relations with the other player characters at the very beginning of the first adventure. Okay, so looking good so far. Now let's flip the sheet over to the back side. There isn't much here that we need to do at this point. Once we begin our first game, we can then fill in what our dramatic hooks are at that time. So for now, all we really need to look at is gear and weapons. Kult Divinity Lost doesn't really focus on character money or starting funds or any of that stuff. While money might be certainly important to the player characters themselves and the campaign and whatever that goes on inside the stories that we're having with them, it's not an actual focused portion of the game itself. Characters might begin the game off wealthy, successful business people or trust fund kids or whatever it is, or they might begin the game flat broke, struggling to pay the bills or even homeless. Those details the player and the game master decide depending on what works best for the story and what all seems appropriate for whatever it is they're putting together. Being set in the present day, gear and equipment prices and availability are all kind of simply what they are in the real world, and just kind of simply what also works in the story that you're having. Now, some equipment might have special rules for it depending on what that equipment is. So for our character, we're going to give him his basic gear that he has, including some starting cash that he's got on him. He's got a 10-year-old car, a laptop, cell phone, lockpicks, basic stuff like that. For weapons, we're going to start him off with 2. Let's say that he's got a switchblade, and then we're going to list the appropriate information for that weapon, and a 1911 45 pistol, as well as the stats and available moves you can do with it. Now we'll get into what all that means and all that information in a later video, but for now, we're just simply going to list that out on our character sheet. Okay, so that is it for our character sheet, except for character appearance. Players should list out what the character looks like physically and how they dress and how they carry themselves, but for this, I'm simply going to use a totally random picture off the internet to show what he looks like. There we go. Perfect. Hey, I'm Jack Morton, but you can call me Jack the NPC. I'm a detective by trade, or at least I used to be a detective. I guess I really don't have an office no more and business is dried up. See, a while back, some woman comes to me and she says that her sister is missing. And not just her sister, but her sister's entire apartment building is just gone. And the only proof that she has that her sister or this building ever existed at all is a single photograph. Now, a lot of people are thinking that this woman is crazy, but I'm thinking that I got to get a couple $100 to get my car fixed, so I took the job. Long story short, I found the woman's building. Yeah, it was just right there. Nothing had happened to it, plain as day, but nobody could see it no more. Took me a while in order to see it, kind of looking at it with the right angles, and there it was. So I go inside, see if I could find my client's sister, or at least I think I went inside. Truth is, all I remember was walking up to that door, and next thing I know, I am flying down the highway, dripping sweat, my heart is pounding, my clothes are shredded and covered in blood and some sort of oily goo, and I ain't got no bullets in my pistol no more. Anyway, so sometimes I get little flashes of what I saw in there. These kind of weird images fill my head of these nightmare things. Little different things like sights or smells. Those will kick those off, and all of a sudden it is flashback city for me. Truth is, though, I don't know how much of that stuff is nightmare and how much of that stuff is true no more. So I called my client. I was going to tell her what I found inside the building, so she was coming to my office to meet me, and she got killed in a freaking car wreck on the way. Now, a lot of people might say that was some pretty bad luck right there, but I don't think that was bad luck at all. Somebody killed her. How I know that is because that photograph that she had of her sister and her sister's building, it was gone after that. Not just the copy that she had, but my copy that I had on my computer was completely gone, like it was never there in the first place. So I go to the library. I'm going to check out an old newspaper article that I had found that had also shown the same building, and it was gone too. And I don't mean the newspaper was gone, it was still there on microfiche, but the article had changed, like somebody had rewritten history. Who in the hell has got the power to make a building disappear and rewrite history? All I know is that they were trying to cover their tracks and I was the loose thread on that, so I got the hell out of there fast. Ever since then, I've been moving around a lot, and I ain't got no idea who I should be trusting no more. Okay, there's a couple people I still trust, and there's Ben, my bartender, great guy, I can trust him. There's also this old widow lady, kind of treats me like her adopted son. She is great, and she is totally trustworthy. And then there is Mark. Mark is my best friend since we were kids, right? His daughter is my goddaughter, and I miss the hell out of them. Problem is, I can't go see them no more because I don't want to put them in any sort of danger. Not until I could figure out who in the hell is behind all this and put a stop to them. Finally, once the character is complete and presented to the game master and the other players to review, the final fleshing of this character should be done through a series of questions that the game master and the other players ask, getting the details about them and their personality. The book offers us some sample questions to get us started with that. The player, of course, is going to need to commit to an answer and should write that answer down, and it looks a lot like this. Who or what are you the most passionate about? Well, right now it's finding out who's after me and putting a stop to them. But prior to that, I liked boating. I liked going out on the water. Follow-up question. Do you own a boat? Yeah, I guess I do. At least I did have a boat. One of the first attempts in my life was my boat caught fire while I was inside of it. Now they said that was an accident, but I know it wasn't. Nearly got me too. Do you live alone or with somebody else? Where and how do you live? A little bit of both, really. Right now I'm shacked up in the attic apartment of this older couple, Jim and Kathy Amond. I need to write that down. Anyway, it's sort of a cash under the table sort of arrangement, so it's pretty good for both of us, and I try to keep to myself as much as possible. Where do you hang out in your spare time? Well, now that I ain't got my boat no more, I spend most of my time at the library or on the deep web trying to search whatever I can find on missing buildings, and you would be amazed at some of the stuff that I found. But I guess whenever I'm not doing that, I'm at the Crimson Shamrock, a little local dive bar that I like. Who do you have sex with, if anyone at all? Wow, I ain't ever been asked that one in a job interview before, but okay, yeah, sure, I can go ahead and answer that. I'm not seeing nobody right now. It's kind of difficult in my situation, you know, so it's pretty much just casual hookups with anybody that I can meet in the bar. Now, I can't take them back to my place, so it's either their place or, just somewhere convenient that we can do the deed. Have you ever hurt another person? And if so, how do you feel about that? Yeah, I have. One of my first cases that I took was to find this runaway kid, right? So I tracked him down to this old barn on the outside of town that he and some other kids in some sort of chop shop going on in. So I'm lurking in the woods outside of this place, and I'm about to sneak off, call the cops, and tell them where to go. But one of them saw me, and he came up from behind me and just started wailing on me, and I thought I was going to die right then and there. So I drew my pistol and I fired. And it was a 16-year-old kid. So now I'm on the phone with the ambulance, clutching this kid's hand, begging to get there faster. The kid ended up dying on the way to the hospital. The courts ruled that I wasn't responsible for that it was completely self-defense, but I know that wasn't completely true right there, because if I hadn't gotten sloppy and gotten seen, my kid would still be alive. The game suggests that no more than 10 minutes per character needs to be spent on this portion, and we started our campaign and we made all of our characters, and I asked each of them these 8 sample questions to my players, and the simple act of them thinking about these questions and answering them was the big moment for us when these characters really became people to us, rather than just a bunch of stuff that was written down on a character sheet. Several deeper aspects of their personality and their life emerged from these questions, making them really well-rounded and very interesting. So I brought it up when I was doing my character backstory video because I cannot recommend enough how well this worked. So Game Masters, do not neglect this portion and be sure that you and all the players are noting what those answers are. Okay, and with that, we have a completed cult character. Now that we have this, we have something that we can reference and we can use as we explore the game's mechanics, combat, stability, advancement. And if anyone wants a copy of this character to follow along or maybe play for yourself, you can download this character sheet at the link in the description below. Okay, well, that is it for this episode. Hopefully it's been helpful for some of you out there. In the next portion of the series, we're going to explore game mechanics through player moves. Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you want to see some more of our stuff, such as game reviews, or how-tos, or even more of this series on Kult Divinity Lost, just hit that subscribe button. And if you got any questions about anything in particular, requests, and different things that we should cover during this series, just hit us up in the comments below. The next time, gamers, you have a great day. You have made several different versions of me for all the different games that we've talked about over the years, but I gotta be honest that this is the first time that I have felt really invested in my own backstory. So I'm gonna be really cheesed off if we never get to find out just who in the hell is behind this conspiracy.